Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our panel discussion, which is entitled The Pandemic, Professions and Progression. And this morning we'll be looking at the extra challenges presented to working women over the last 11 months and contemplate whether or not home working is helping or hindering our progression. And just in case you're wondering, I should let you know that we have invited both men and women to be in our audience this morning. I know we can't all see the audience, but I'm sure that you are there. And I would encourage, if you want to participate in any of the discussions that the panel will be having, to use the chat function and send any comments or questions, and we'll pick those up as we go along. For those of you I haven't met before, my name is Tania Goodman, and I head up the employment team at Collyer Bristow, where we advise our clients on a huge array of issues, including diversity and equality. And as a law firm, we're very much alive to these considerations. And this event is being held by our Hire Committee, which was established at Collyer Bristow to champion women at work, both within our own firm and beyond to the wider female workforce in all sectors and communities. So we're very fortunate to have an esteemed panel of women joining us today for this discussion. And I'll now allow them to introduce each of themselves to you, and then we can get started with some of the questions. So if I pass over to Amy first.
Hi everyone, and thanks Tania, thanks for the introduction, thanks for having me. So I'm a founding director of RedLaw. We're a legal recruitment business. We're focused on finding staff for law firms, predominantly in the city, at all levels, from some PAs all the way through to senior partners, as well as jointly managing the company. I personally also have a sort of full-time fee-earning role, placing partners in law firms. As well as that, I also am the mother of two primary school-aged children, ages 8 and 10, and also wife to a husband who works full-time as well.
Great, thank you. Maria.
Good morning, and thank you for joining all of us. I'm a life coach. I'm self-employed. I've been working for 15 years, and I work predominantly with I basically work with people from businesses, but also people who are also self-employed, and at the moment mainly focused on self-employed people. From photographers to actors to people in the city as well. I have 2 children, but they're much older, 18 and 20, and actually 21 now, gosh. And they look after me a lot. So I'm very, very happy at the moment being at home with them. And generally I'm a whole life coach, which means I focus on the whole life, not just a career. But I find that if your life is in balance, your career ticks along. Thank you.
Thanks. Shivani.
Yeah, hi, thank you, Tania. So I'm Shivani Makh. I'm a relationship director at Barclays Corporate. So my role involves basically looking after and managing the banking relationship of professional services firm here in London. I've been with Barclays for almost 10 years and doing this specific role for about 3. I just returned back from maternity leave a couple of months ago, and I've got a 15-month-old daughter, and I have a full-time working husband. So we both juggle the responsibility of childcare and do our respective work at the same time.
Thank you. And Samara.
Hello, good morning everyone. I'm Samara Dutton. I work at Collyer Bristow. I have been at Collyer Bristow, I think, for about exactly 10 years now. I joined as a junior solicitor, but have recently become partner, and I head up the contentious trust and probate team. And I snuck off to have a couple of kids along the way. So I've got a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old at the moment.
Thank you. And just for full disclosure, I didn't mention it, I don't actually have any children, so I have maybe a different perspective, but as a chair, I'm not going to be really talking about myself that much, but I just thought I'd put it out there for what it's worth. So some recent reports have suggested that women in business have been hit the hardest by the COVID pandemic, And a study by McKinsey found that 1 in 4 women are contemplating downshifting their careers or shockingly leaving the workplace completely as a result. And another study for the Institute of Fiscal Studies found that in terms of working women, they are doing more on average in terms of childcare and housework than fathers who have the same working arrangements. So understandably, concerns have been raised about the impact that this is having on women working in terms of their earnings and career prospects, and whether or not there's going to be a widening of the gap in gender equality. So to all the panelists first, I'd just like you to sort of give an overview or snapshot of the bigger picture, whether you, in your experience, you agree or disagree with those findings that home working has reinforced the more traditional gender stereotypes. And I'm also going to ask our audience to participate in a poll to answer that question. I presume it's a yes or no answer, and hopefully we'll see the responses when they come up. And then, yeah, we can share that news with you if the technology works. So just taking it in the same order as I did before, Amy, I'll start with you. What are your thoughts? Do you think the pandemic has reinforced traditional gender roles? Yes or no, and why?
I think yes. I'm going to sort of slightly temper it, because I speak to many female partners, and definitely the majority seem to have slipped into the role, which is actually they've taken on a few more responsibilities than men. However, I do think that I've also spoken with many male partners as well, law firms, where children is now a topic of conversation in which it wasn't necessarily. So I think although when childcare responsibilities previously often didn't come up, it was never mentioned by male partners, and I think that is good because it's now at least on the radar, on the agenda. But I do think, from my experience of people that I've spoken to at that sort of primary school age sort of sweet spot, where I think it's hitting people sort of hardest, where they're not going to nursery and they are responsible, I think there are more women still with main childcare responsibilities. So I would say yes.
Okay, thank you. Maria?
I think Amy's absolutely right. I think it's definitely voicing the question, and men are getting more involved in answering this question, which I think is fantastic. I saw an article in The Guardian the other day about how the government had put out a social media stay-at-home ad. I don't know if any of you saw it, with 4 tableaus of pictures of women working at home, taking up the slack of the domestic roles, ironing whilst looking after a baby. And there was one picture with a male sitting on a sofa, and I just thought, okay, this ad had to be taken down after so much sort of stick that the government got. But it just showed that this underlying inequality is still there. And when we did have to come home due to the pandemic, yes, the women did pick up the pieces. They did take their roles, but their roles were already there. They were already managing it.
Thank you. Shivani?
I agree with both Amy and Maria here. Obviously, we are doing a lot more than we were doing before, but at the same time, I also believe that we are responding organically to the needs that we are being presented now. And at the same time, I can talk about personal experience that men are stepping up as well. I mean, earlier my husband would just go to work and he would come back home at 7 or half 7, by the time everything is probably done. And now they are home, they are probably more aware that, we are managing our work and domestic life at the same time. So they are pitching in as well. I mean, and a lot of people that I work with sharing childcare responsibility. They are, picking their kids up from nursery, picking up their kids from school. So I think it's a mixture of both things, that of course we are picking up more responsibility, but I think we are getting more help as well.
Well, that's good to know. And it's, for our male members in the audience, I'm sure they'll find it reassuring that we are acknowledging that they are also
I
making
hope so. They are. I believe they are.
And Samara, what do you have to say?
Yeah, I think I'd echo the other panelists here. The statistics around this are quite hard to ignore. I think I read somewhere that there's something like 16 billion hours of unpaid work done globally a day, and that women are responsible for 3/4 or more of it. But equally, that men have at least doubled their workload as well since the pandemic. So although I don't think you can ignore the fact that the burden is unequal at the moment, I'm quite sort of optimistic that actually what the pandemic has done has shone a spotlight on the inequality, and that there's a lot going on now. There's sort of, you know, campaigns, social media movements, etc. So that hopefully you'll actually get a step forward in terms of addressing it rather than a backward step to the traditional stereotypes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good to hear. In terms of what our audience think, as you've been giving your thoughts, like, has the COVID-19 homeworking reinforced traditional gender stereotypes? Yes, so 87% of the audience. No, therefore, say 13%. We don't have a don't know option. So no one's sitting on the fence. So 87% is pretty high, and that's probably what we would have expected. Maybe we'll run the poll again at the end and see if things have changed. Unlikely, but you never know. So I'd just like to move the conversation on a bit now to another report. There seems to be a lot of reports coming out over all this recently. This one's from Deloitte, and this says that nearly 1/3 of women feel like they need to be available or on call at work, and are concerned that if they aren't able to fulfill that need, their career progression may be impeded. Which is slightly ironic, I suppose, because presentism was something that was sort of office-based and having to physically be in the office. But now, is there a sort of culture of presentism being at home because you're not really able to go out and do very much, and therefore you're always there and available? And if that is the case, how can you manage it, and how can you set boundaries for your colleagues and clients? So I'll throw this question over to Samara.
Yeah, I think it's definitely present. I think the idea of presentism, as you suggest, is not something that's unique to the pandemic. I think working from home, what that has done is sort of extended the hours in which you need to present yourself as available at all times. It's a difficult one. I was actually having quite an interesting conversation around this with another solicitor that I was working on a case with. And we felt that it was more sort of since the lockdown, it was more junior staff that we felt they needed to be tied to their desk and to sort of excuse any absence, etc. And that in reality, had they asked or expressed a need not to be there, that as a manager or sort of more senior member, you would have been quite open to their taking an afternoon walk or doing what they need to do. So I do wonder how much that pressure comes internally rather than from sort of the management, and if it really is just a question of sort of opening lines of communication about when you can reasonably be expected to be available.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I mean, for example, when you're physically in an office around the lunchtime, let's say from 12 till 2, at any given time, the office is generally quieter because people have gone out to have a sandwich or do a bit of shopping, and that's totally expected, and nobody would ever push back on that. So why is it that we feel that's any different working like this, but somehow, I don't know, is it because you don't want people to think you're shirking just because you're working from home, that you're, you know, taking advantage of the situation?
I think it is that. I think you sort of assume that if you don't immediately respond, somebody thinks that you're watching telly, or, you know, rather than actually dealing with the myriad things that you have to deal with at home.
Yeah, absolutely. Does anyone else have anything to say on that topic?
Well, I think sorry.
No, go on, Maria.
I'm just thinking that reading the McKinsey article, it sort of suggested that the employees and the productivity is definitely up, and people are entrusting people to work at home, and therefore that stigma is becoming less, so that you are sitting on the sofa watching a bit of Netflix by mistake. You know, that's just not happening. You know, I think we all know it's not happening. If only it was happening. But I think it's all internal. I think the communication is the key here, and I think employees should be reaching out if they feel this, and sort of reassuring their staff and their employees that, you know, they get it. They know the pressure you're under.
And I think we also need role models here. I completely agree with Samara that, you know, the junior member of staff, now because they have started home working more than they ever did before, they probably think that, oh, they need to respond to the email straight away. I remember back in the days I used to do that, and I used to think that I have to email within like 2 minutes, otherwise people are going to think, oh, you know, I'm doing something else. But I think what I've noticed ever since I've come back from maternity leave, things have changed tremendously within Barclays. We make sure you know, we don't send any emails out to staff after 7 o'clock in the evening. So we are you know, demonstrating the need to have you know, a balanced work life and home life. So nobody would send an email out to anybody after 7. And of course, you know, people are working till late anyways, but, you know, you're probably doing admin or you're writing a report, but just to sort of demonstrate that you don't need to, you know, do work beyond a certain time is probably what we need to do to reassure other members of staff that it's okay, it's downtime, and you can just log off, and you don't need to do work after a certain time. So I think role models is probably what we need, I believe.
Yeah, actually, we just had a couple of comments from our audience, so I'll share because it's nice to know that you're out there. Kirsty Wells, hi Kirsty, haven't seen you for a while, hope all's well. She says to the panelists, research shows that women are more likely than men to become workaholics, with personality traits encouraging perfectionism. And maybe that links to some of the points that have been made by the panel. And Jana Dea, who works for us, says to the panel, how do you switch off from being available for office-related and client work? Is it a case of literally switching off phones and emails after a certain hour so you can concentrate on childcare and other matters? Do you have any about that?
I think it's really, I've got to say, I think it's really hard. I think I also completely agree with Shivani that actually it needs to sort of start from the top. If you're junior, I think it's very hard to say, I'm just simply not available from this time. You might be worried about your career progression. So I think that's definitely a role of the leaders to almost set an example specifically for that reason. I also think as well, the perfectionist streak, you know, I've taken 2 periods of maternity leave. I'm a co-owner of my company, but even then I felt the need to show that nothing's changed. I'm just as available and I can do just as good a job, even though you're also a mother now, you've got different roles. So I definitely think that actually some of the things to put in place are difficult to do, but I think really necessary for us to be able to change, because I think the temptation is, you know, I walk past my study and there's the laptop and there's the phone, and just keep going back, which does interrupt, you know, your life. And it's not something you would necessarily do if you're in the office all day and coming home. You'd then have had that period to switch off on the journey back.
I mean, it's nearly permission, isn't it? We need permission to have time off. I mean, I work with a lot of self-employed people, as I said, and this has always been the case, the workaholic problem. And so ever since emails arrived, you're probably too young to know the difference pre-email, but pre-email, you were home. You know, now you're on all the time, pandemic or no pandemic, because of the email. And so my job with a lot of clients is creating the work-life balance and giving them permission to see, you know, how they, you know, redesign their lives, how they want their lives. So this is what everyone needs to do, is give yourself permission, you know, contact your, you know, communicate. I know being a junior in an executive company is very different from this, but it's still your life.
I wonder about the use of our calendars and diaries at work as well, you know, to the extent that our colleagues can see our calendars and diaries and what we're up to. I mean, do you think it would still be professional and appropriate to block out, say, an hour at lunchtime and not available? You don't have to necessarily put what you're doing, but just block it out so that if people look, they can see that you're not there. you think that's one mechanism to deal with it?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I think certainly since having children and now, you know, with the home working, having a lot stricter time management that is visually available to people that need me is really helpful. And to actually block out time for whatever it is that you've allocated to that time, and ignore, as Anjana's asking, yes, ignore emails and phone calls coming in unless they're really, really urgent. Ignore them to do what you have planned to do, but set aside time later to review anything that's come in during that time. I think the only way to manage the amount of work that needs to be done at the moment is to be really strict about time in that way. And yeah, keep a private appointment in the diary if it's something personal, but explain it to whoever needs to know what it is that you're doing during that time. I think that is a good way of dealing with it.
Okay.
One law firm I know, a big sort of US law firm, has now banned any internal meetings between 12 and 2. I mean, specifically really for the purpose, they said that actually people should be going out and getting some daylight and doing something in those hours to get some exercise in, because otherwise, you know, it's too dark in the morning, too dark in the evenings. But that's quite an interesting, that's a firm-wide mantra, that no internal meetings between that in that lunchtime period.
I think there is a movement towards this, you know, a sort of widespread recognition that mental health requires that people have time to themselves. So I don't think you should experience any pushback to requests for sort of time to do what needs to be done. I think I read about one company that in the US that had banned email altogether. I think that's probably quite a drastic step, and I forget which one it was, but you know, it's working towards that outcome, not banning email, but you know, ensuring that people have time to get a work-life balance.
And this impacts not just on women, of course, but equally on men and at all ages. I think it's a much more generic issue than specifically how it impacts on women. I think I'm sure it's felt by male colleagues as well. Just a couple of comments. Anne-Marie Destrange has sent, I'm seeing a normalising of flexible working in the work I'm doing with various firms. People who previously hadn't worked part-time are seeing that they can be very efficient, possibly even more efficient by taking regular breaks during the day, whether that's to exercise, rest, or look after the children. And Kirsty's come back to say, commentators are suggesting that certain industries such as retail and hospitality are more female-centric and have been more disproportionately affected by the pandemic. The government is supporting more male-centric industries like construction. What is the panel's view about this, please? I think there's some truth in that.
I mean, I think yes. There's, I mean, retail, hospitality are the biggest, you know, the bars, the restaurants, the shops are the biggest areas. They're much more female dominated, younger women particularly, so they are disproportionately affected. Somebody said lower paid workers, but, you know, there's, I suppose, logistics and construction are much more male dominated, and they're the areas that are sort of thriving and continuing. So I do agree with that. Yeah.
And Anne Chatreux, I hope I pronounced your surname correctly, she says that my clients have found it really useful to have conversations with their boss to establish what the expectations really are, instead of the employee guessing what they might be, which can open the door for negative workaholic tendencies. I think that's right. I think, more junior people may feel slightly awkward about having those conversations, but actually if they were to open that, then I guess most bosses would say, of course, you need to have some downtime. And
exactly. I think was it Amy's suggestion that perhaps that needs to be led from the top to sort of pave the way for that conversation. You know, so they're more encouraged to have it. I'm not quite sure how that would look, but
and I think what we also need to do is to move away from the stereotype of, you know, the usual one-to-one with your colleagues, just, you know, once a month. We need to have more informal chats as well. Just to give you an example, we have 1 hour set aside every Friday where anybody can have, you know, just bring their coffee, bring their drink, and literally just talk about anything and everything under the sun, really. It basically first of all shows your human side. If you have struggled throughout throughout the week. You can just talk about it openly. Your manager is there, and your colleagues are there. It's just to provide that environment and that reassurance that everybody's struggling in a different way. People who have children, people who don't have children, people who are sharing flats with other friends or the flatmates. Everybody needs some sort of release, towards the end of the week or middle of the week. So it's just to provide that informal platform to have the open dialogue. I think it's very, very important just to get the dialogue going, and giving the reassurance to people that you don't have to work beyond a certain time. And just to answer Anjana's question about how do you switch off, also delegating your work if you possibly can. If you are really, really busy, if you have childcare responsibility, but there's a project or an email that needs to go out within half an hour, maybe you can ask somebody else who's available. Again, having these conversations, I believe, are very, very important. Just to have transparency that, and I think there is no point in putting your hand up and say, oh, look, I'm struggling today. Because you'll be surprised to know that there are many others who are probably in the same boat, and they just need to hear that I'm not the only one. There are other people who are maybe in the same situation. So let's help each other out and sort of see if anybody else can jump in and do the work for you, and maybe you can return the favor later.
Yeah, good point. I'm just going to move this on a bit to trying to maybe look at some positives that might have come out of the situation in terms of female career progression. And I think Samara sort of touched on it a bit earlier when she said the spotlight has been shone on the issue, which it perhaps wasn't before. But to Maria, I'd just like to ask you, do you think that the way we've been working during the pandemic might have helped female career progression by sort of normalising the concept of working from home and better managing the other things going on in our lives, whatever they may be, domestic chores, caring responsibilities, work, family, Netflix, downtime, whatever. Do you think there's some upside to all this?
Yeah, I think there is. I think, firstly, women are really good at adapting. We've been adapting, juggling, doing our double jobs for years and years and years. Well, most of us have, and we must be good at it because we're still doing it. So, but we've got, as someone did point out earlier on the panel, that we've got, commuting takes up a lot of time. Some people commute up to 2 hours a day, and so that's 4 hours. 4 hours of extra time that, okay, if you have children, that's all gone immediately. But for the ones who don't have children, careers are progressing because you've got extra hours, you've got extra time to focus on it. Also, I think Zoom and other platforms make it very accessible, make the office very accessible, make people go, people are going to more meetings than they were, people are connecting more because they've got more time to do so. And even some people are being braver on Zoom. So some people who've been in a boardroom and wouldn't say anything are now coming forward. It's sort of given them a bit of, courage, I suppose, because they feel protected by the camera, maybe, I'm not sure. But I've heard a lot of clients who really are enjoying it. They feel more part of the company than they've ever felt. So it's extraordinary. Yeah, and I think it's working for a lot of people. And again, normalizing working from home is definitely a positive, because some women were already working from home, so now they feel more on a level playing field. I mean, and equal to the men. Maybe.
Do you think that's also to some extent dependent on your age and your experience and your profile within your business? Yeah,
definitely. I think as everyone has already touched on, that the higher up you are, the more confidence you have on looking after your hours as well, and working more productively, and not feeling that you're being pushed into things you don't want to do. So I think communication, it just keeps coming back to communicating with your managers, and managers communicating with their staff through Zoom or these little meetings on a Friday, I think are fantastic. I think absolutely spot on.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just fielding the. Can you all see the chat that's coming up? I can't cover all of these points because probably won't have time to cover all of them, but just a couple of comments. Somebody, Patrick Wheeler, hi Patrick, has said, what do the panel see as the main challenges for graduates during and following the pandemic, which if anyone wants to pick up on that. And Alison Campanar has said, a lot of people in senior management positions are men and everyone has a different level of support. How do you explain what the challenges of homeschooling are while juggling a job when they are not in the same situation? Also, Rishi Sunak recently said, we owe mums everywhere an enormous debt of thanks. To what extent do you think homeschooling in particular has skewed this picture? I mean, which of you are homeschooling? Amy, I think you said you're doing that.
I think, I mean, it's really, I've got to say, it's really difficult. I mean, my children are, they're primary school age, but they're not tiny, so they can get on with things a little bit, but they're state school, they've got 5 minutes of live registration a day. So it's really not live lessons. It's not replicating the school picture at all. I think one thing I do think, even if, again, as I said, if someone's in a senior position in management and is not homeschooling, or the kids are of a different age, they can't see that. One thing I think this is on the national radar now. I think it's a open topic that's front headlines of the news, which I think can only benefit. Everyone is talking about it, which even if you are not personally suffering from having to do that as well, I think it's the raising of the issue is great and is only a good thing for being able to then, as a sort of somebody homeschooling, expecting a level of support as well from your employer.
Kirsty has just commented to say that Maria's point is interesting. This is about how people interact with Zoom and Teams and stuff, and saying that because research says that introverts of both genders have actually enjoyed and thrived as a result of the normalisation of remote working. So who knew? That is quite surprising, because I think if we'd taken a poll before the pandemic, most people would have been quite camera shy, myself included. I never do FaceTime on Facebook or whatever it is. And, the idea of being on screen like this was actually absolutely awful. But, once you've set yourself up and you're ready to go, it's quite liberating. So I think there has been a shift in all that. And when I speak to clients now, most of them want to do video calls, whereas before they were quite happy to deal on the telephone. Now the telephone's a bit of a poor relation. So maybe it's just our need as humans to want to kind of connect with each other on another level, rather than just...
We also love seeing where everyone lives. I mean, the comments of all these, government officials, we look at all their pictures on the wall and...
This is true. Has anybody got a bookshelf behind them? Shivani,
yeah, that's my husband's office. So I've nicked his office space today, and yeah, he's got a lot of books at the back, and my daughter's little storybook shelf as well. Yeah.
Sorry, was somebody going to say something?
I was just going to say, I'll be interested to see when offices do reopen, etc. What the mix turns out to be, because I think there will still be demand for these sort of online events, but I'm not sure how well that will work. I don't know how they'll mesh with the sort of in-person events, but to be seen, I suppose.
Yeah, we'll have to. Okay, so I'm just going to now have a look at whether we think everything that's happening now is a sort of temporary shift during the pandemic in terms of employers and society's attitudes towards the work-life balance and competing responsibilities, or whether we're going to go back to exactly the way it was before. So is this a temporary shift, or is this a real true evolution? Shivani, what do you think?
Well, I think the time will tell, but I think what has actually happened, there has been a social shift, definitely. And pandemic has put us in a very unique situation that we had never seen before, that we can actually work from home productively and profitably. So I think, again, going forward, I personally think that things are not going to be the same as they used to be. I don't think so. People would come into work 5 days a week, or expected to come into work 5 days a week, again, depending what sort of work you do. Talking about myself, to be fair, Barclays have always been very flexible with home working, again, depending on what sort of job you do. And I think we have sort of shown over last 11 months that we can work, pretty well, working remotely. Again, having said that, and I think most of us do very collaborative work. We do need social interaction. We do need to go into, offices for printing, or just to be with people and share ideas and stuff. So I really hope that employees recognize that, and what you've said initially, that there might be some legal angle to it. That are we actually allowed to work as we are now? But there will definitely be flexibility, and I think for employers to make their work place attractive, to retain the talent and also attract more talent, you have to offer flexible working. I don't think so they will be in a position going forward to sort of say that, oh, there is no flexibility in the firm. That there has to be, because I believe that the other firms would offer that.
Yeah. Yes, I was saying actually the panel had a chat just before we came live with the audience, just to kind of get to know each other a bit. And I was just saying, from the employment law side of things, that flexible working requests, I think we're all familiar with what those look like. And certainly before the pandemic, there was a lot of scratching of heads in some places and some workplaces about how far do we go with flexible working, because flexible working is a permanent change to the contract rather than a temporary change. And any employee who has 26 weeks or more service is entitled to apply for flexible working, and an employer has to consider it meaningfully and deal with it within 3 months and give a response. And there are only quite 8 prescriptive reasons why you can refuse flexible working requests. And some of those reasons now might be a bit outdated, given the way that we've managed to work remotely. Like about how effective it was going to be if you weren't physically in the office, productivity might go down, client expectations might not be met, and some of these things, which to some extent have gone out of the window now because we've all proven that we can do it. But I think what will be more of a challenge if and when these requests come in. I mean, for example, would an employee make a flexible working request to work entirely from home and say, I really don't need to be in the office at all? But the shift in dynamic is going to be when the workforce does return to the office in greater numbers. What impact is that going to have on people who are not in the office? I mean, there's clearly a work dynamic which is going to start firing up again. And if you're not part of it, then how is that going to impact on you, your career, and the business? And is your employer entitled to take account of all that in considering your request? I don't know if the panel have any thoughts or views. Shivani, you said that if employers don't embrace this, they're going to find it much harder to recruit and might end up losing people. And I think you're probably right. But how far do you think they need to go in order to get the balance right?
I think the time will tell. I think it's just too soon to predict that, what's going to happen in months to come, because we even though the end is in sight, but we still don't know how soon things will go back to normal. I'm pretty sure that, firms would definitely be flexible. I don't think so. We will go back to how things were before. Sort of what I've said before, because we have already proven that remote working has worked. Again, if somebody puts in requests to work 5 days a week from home, that's again debatable, depending on what sort of job they do and do they need to come into work. But flexible working is going to remain, I believe, and I really hope so it does, because again it gives you an opportunity to to focus on your home life, things that you hadn't had a chance to do before. I mean, I can talk about myself. I used to leave home at 7 o'clock in the morning and would return back at 7 or 8 or sometimes 9. If I had to do it now with a little daughter, I would dread it. I mean, I would dread going into work every single day and spending 14, 15 hours away from her, and would come back and see her sleeping. I wouldn't want to do that. So I would definitely need some flexibility around my work, and I'm pretty sure now, because people have seen that it has worked, there's no reason for employees to reject that completely. Of course, there has to be a compromise, and we have to reach to a point where we both agree that how it works. I mean, both favorable for the company and the employees. But flexible working is going to stay, I believe.
Yeah, and also I think for the whole workforce, because there's been a lot of talk in our firm, I'm sure other places, and we talked about it today, about the more junior end of the spectrum in our businesses, and needing some mentors and needing people around to learn from, to speak to. So it's not just about how we might feel as maybe more senior people, but how we support our staff.
Absolutely.
And show that we care and we're actually there and present sometimes.
Absolutely, I agree.
Amy, just wearing your recruitment hat, I mean, have you seen any shifts from any of your clients in terms of what they're thinking about or proposing to new recruits on this topic?
Well, first of all, I think I as with everyone else, I think I've seen a significant shift. Law firms, generally the last bastion of change, they, I think, have been forced to adopt flexible working, as with everybody else. But I think they've resisted it for a long time. But I think having seen that productivity and profitability have all been, I think there was definitely a worry at the beginning. And then sort of summer onwards has been actually, look, we can function very well like this. So that's been sort of forced to have been sort of adopted well. I think with law firms, again, across the board, they seem to have, there's an understanding, it appears to be, that there will always be now an element of flexible working. That's definitely the impression most firms are saying, actually, when we go back, we're still going to retain that. Some have put into place very formal agreements of, and that's magic circle firms, 50% plus flexible working, and that's where they're sort of starting out from, which I think is great. The issue that I can foresee, which I think lots of organisations will need to give thought to, is it's all well and good when everybody is remote working across a business, but when there is a mix of office working and remote working, it's going to be important to still retain and mesh that one culture, as opposed to then creating different cultures where either you're in the office or you're excluded because you're out of the office because the decision makers in the office, for example. And I think that a lot of organisations will need to give thought to.
And I think some people might feel as well that they're missing out in terms of their career progression if they are not seen in the same way, because at the moment we're doing team meetings and on Zoom and whatever, but when you go back to a physical office, is there going to be a blend of actual real life meetings and then zooming somebody in on a screen, and how will that work? I mean, certainly before the pandemic, I have to say that wasn't hugely successful in my experience. We generally had a squawk box in the middle of the table and somebody was on a speakerphone, and they couldn't really hear what was going on, and it was just very disjointed, and it didn't really make the meeting run terribly well. So I don't know whether it's a sort of, it all works like this remotely or it all works well in the office, but how will it, I'm not, and it might work with, I think you need the technology, I guess. You need the infrastructure in offices to the extent it's not there already to make it happen seamlessly. And I'm not convinced at the moment that many employers have that set up in that way. We'll have to see.
I think one of the problems as well is for the graduates being remote from the get-go, not being able to, have that boardroom buzz or the connection with your team or connection even with your managers, that they get to know you and what you're good at. And, I think it must be absolutely awful for them.
And I also think as well with a graduate, they're having to put their head above the parapet if they want to ask a question. In an office environment, you can just speak to somebody aside, you can ask questions, you don't have to specifically email or call somebody. And I think the hardest hit is the graduates and the juniors coming through, just not being able to just, or by osmosis, learn what you would normally do as sort of in a physical work environment.
My daughter's at university at the moment, and a lot of her peers are doing, so they're still in that internship stage, but all their internships are online. It's quite extraordinary. They have no real concept of what it's like working in an office, or it just doesn't relate really.
I was just interested, Amy, whether you had yet seen the impact of that. I suppose for graduates it's a bit early, but for trainee solicitors who've qualified, whether there's more movement at that end of the market because people don't feel as integrated in the office as perhaps they, well, certainly not as they would have been if we'd all physically been there. Have you seen more? I know you tend to back more for partners personally, but
we've seen less demand, and that's the biggest thing, because people want people who've got experience that actually can pick up the work and they're not having to train them. So definitely it's affecting the juniors. Firms are busy, but that's, well, I would like somebody with at least a couple of years experience upwards. Yeah.
Yeah. So well, that's going to have a knock-on effect, obviously, to the whole industry if we haven't got the more junior people coming through the ranks in the same numbers.
Yeah.
Also just like to touch on whether women in particular, although I guess it applies to everyone, but whether we are heard as well in the virtual office. I know there's been some comment that sometimes people feel more heard, bizarrely, but is our presence still felt and our contribution still valued, or does the lack of physical presence that comes with home working have a negative impact on women's ability to progress in their career? Shivani, what do you think?
I think it applies to all genders. I mean, we can't just sort of single out women here, but I can talk from personal experience. As I said, I just returned back from maternity a couple of months ago when I returned back to home working, which was all quite new to me. And I came back to new manager, absolutely new team. And initially I found it difficult to make my presence felt, to be very honest with you. But I think things that you pick up along the way, again, what sort of helped me is constant communication with other members of team, picking up a phone and introducing myself. Same with my manager. And I do feel for junior staff, because I think they are the ones who sort of feel that, they need to be in the office environment to sort of experience that buzz that, we have experienced in the past. I strongly believe that you need to also have relationship with other members outside your own team to sort of see what's going on. What have sort of worked for me in the past is having dialogue with my mentors. I do have few mentors within Barclays and outside, just to again share the thoughts and sort of see, what has sort of worked for you, what can I do to make my presence felt. I think again, the other thing that we have an advantage of is everybody's working virtually. It's not that I'm not in the office and somebody else is. How am I going to make it up? Everybody's in the same boat. And how do you actually work, in your advantage? Some people do think that work speaks, your action speaks louder than words. So maybe what you can do, again, if you have informal sessions with your teammates or your manager, once a week, just again, list out the achievements that you have done within the week. If you've had really good client meeting or you've got really good project that you're working on, just talk it out. I think in that way you are making your presence felt, even of course not face to face, but and again, hear out what other people are doing. I mean, I work with a lot of networks within Barclays, apart from aside from my day job, and what we are trying to encourage people is to talk amongst people within different teams, because sometimes you're working in a very you have a team culture, and that sort of works for you, but maybe other teams are doing something completely different that might work for you, and you can share suggestions. And again, having to contribute to to the team dynamic is something that has worked for me personally. And I strongly encourage people to talk to their mentors if they have any, talk to other team members, have open communication with others, and hopefully that would help.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's all very true. I think teams on teams does work really well like this. I think speaking to the broader organisation is a lot harder, just because you haven't always got a reason to speak to people, but you're not bumping into them in the office physically like you were when you were there, and you can lose touch with people. And of course, there's an internal network that's very important for business development and all that sort of stuff, as well as the external. So while thinking about keeping in touch with clients, keeping in touch with your colleagues can also serve you well. And on a related point, does this make it more difficult for women to get career progression, as well as being present, if we continue in this vein for too long? Is our progression in terms of our career aspirations and promotions, is that going to be inhibited? When are those conversations going to happen? I don't know to what extent companies are still doing appraisals remotely. I mean, we at Collyer Bristow have a personal development plan for each of our fee earners, I think, to be fair, some of those are being more advanced than others. It requires perhaps a bit more discipline to actually make those things happen.
Yeah.
But you can't have these conversations over a lunch or a chat in the same way like this as you can when you're physically in the office. So, do you agree or disagree that women's career progression could be slightly stunted if this was to continue too much longer?
And I think it depends what sort of stage of your career you are in. If you're experienced, if you have done this over the years, you naturally have confidence, and you would naturally have network within the organization that you work in to you voice your opinion. If you are sort of feeling that, or you are getting impacted by this whole remote working, and that's hindering your career progression, you do have ways to communicate that to your senior, to your boss, and maybe make a plan to work things out. But of course, if you're a graduate and you're just starting at, and I know there are a couple of people within my team, as I said, I came back to from a maternity leave to a very new team, and there are some very there's some people who have literally just joined, and I do feel for them. And I think that's again a responsibility of seniors or managers to check on them regularly, just to sort of see, what can we do to make sure that you're comfortable. If you have any questions, can we support you by giving you extra training, by giving you an hour a week, just to shadow our work and sort of see, how you can feel comfortable that your career is not going to get impacted by not being in the office. That responsibility, I really believe, lies within senior management and all of us, to be honest. As good team members, you would want to reach out to other people and sort of see how things are working. I still do. I've been in a bank for 10 years, and if I don't know the answer to a question, I honestly don't feel bad picking up a phone and asking a question to other colleague. And I said, look, I don't know the answer, could you please help me out? Not that only shows you that you want to, of course, learn, but also it will give you a chance to have a chat with that person and do something, ask something you probably wouldn't do that. And just like in the office environment, you would just tap on somebody's shoulder and ask a question. Maybe you can do the same. And coffee chats, I remember in Barclays, pre-COVID, my diary would be full of coffee chat requests, and somebody wants to just meet you for coffee, and I remember dreading that invitation every single time, because that would eat into my day. But I don't mind doing that now. I think, again, sometimes we have this assumption that everybody's so busy, and I don't know if I could ask for 10-15 minutes, but people are very willing to help. That's what I've seen. And again, depends on your organization and your team culture and your work culture. But if you ask, people are more than happy to help and happy to answer your question. So again, coming back to your point, career progression and do you think women gets impacted? I think it's having to gain that confidence, and either that confidence comes from experience, or your senior management needs to give you assurance that we are here to back you up, and we will give you every single tool that you need to be able to get to that level where you need to be.
Yeah, good point. And this question, just to the whole panel, I'll direct it to Samara initially, but if anyone else has got anything to say about this. Just curious to know, over the last 11 months, gosh, I can't believe it's nearly a year since we've been working like this. I think it was the 17th of March when Collyer Bristow decided to have a test day out of the office, and we didn't come back, which was very strange. But have you made any changes or adaptations to the way that you've been working since the March lockdown to where we are now? And if so, what changes or adaptations have you made to your life and your working life? And any tips or anything you can say that might give other people, if they haven't already made those changes, some suggestions? Samara.
I think we've already touched on actually what I've tried to install into my daily routine, which is a stricter time management. I think time management is actually a skill, and it's not one that is natural to me. It comes easier to other people, but I think you have got to, in order to take control of your day, when you're trying to manage housework, children, job, husbands, etc., if you want to be in control of the day, then you need to have pre-planned what that day should look like. Obviously, it needs some flexibility because things will always come up that need dealing with then and there. But in terms of practical tips, I now try to take 10-20 minutes at the end of a day or at the beginning of the next one to plan the next 2 or 3 days and to block out that time, and as far as possible to stick to what I have planned to do, but ensure that time is also built in for responding to the additional things that come in. And what that gives you, other than the sense of sort of regaining control over the madness that is living through lockdown, it also sort of it takes away the guilt of taking an hour out to look after your child because you've planned to have time later to do with what comes in. And I mean, I'm not brilliant at it yet, but when I am doing it, it has helped me incredibly. So that would be my practical tip.
Has anyone else got any other tips, or as we're approaching the end of the hour, anything else that we haven't covered that you would like to mention?
I think Samara has covered time management. The only thing that I do, and I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, I do plan my meetings around my daughter's nap times, and I know that this is a time she's definitely going to be asleep, and that's where I do most of my meetings. She only sleeps for about an hour and a half, but that's the golden time for me, and so that sort of works for me. And then I do have sorry, Samara, go on.
No, I was just going to say, on top of that, I've found that being completely upfront about that, what it is that you're doing, is absolutely fine with clients, colleagues, whoever.
I was actually talking to a client the other day, and she was meant to be sleeping, but she wasn't, because that's how it is, right? When you plan it, it never works. So I remember we were just talking about something really serious, and she came and she was pulling my top, and I was like, "I'm so sorry, Daniel." And he goes, no, that's fine. I had another call, and there were 8 kids on that call. So, it's just everybody's showing their human side, and everybody's understanding. I've had phone calls where, she's crying, and I have to put that on mute, and I said, let her cry, and this is, I'm not going to shy away from the fact that my child needs me. So just be upfront, and sometimes you do have to reschedule calls. That's absolutely fine. We're all human. We're trying to do 100 things at the same time, and if you can't do one, that's fine. You can do it after an hour.
And I think hopefully the sort of the familiarity with those sort of circumstances that everyone now has means that it should translate, should continue.
Absolutely.
Beyond. So if you are joining on a Zoom call and you're disturbed during it, people aren't sort of like, oh, that's terribly unprofessional, etc. It's dealing with what you need to deal with.
Yeah. But it might have actually strengthened some relationships that we have, particularly with our clients, to get to see another side of us, rather than just be suited, here I am in the office. It opens up another dimension.
I completely agree. I mean, I've had conversation with clients that I've not been able to get through, just beyond work. And now, when they either they see your home and they comment on, I don't know, around Christmas, a Christmas tree, or the garden looks beautiful. Again, it just opens up a different avenue that you can talk about. And again, my job is building relationship, and I think that has worked pretty well for me so far.
I think transparency and accepting what is, and just communicating, connecting with all your staff, with your colleagues, is the most important thing. Using Zoom or whatever, just picking up the phone and saying how it's going, at any time.
Yeah, that's all good points. Well, we're at the end of the hour, so I'd just like to thank each and every one of our panel members for your contributions. Really appreciate your time after your busy day. So thank you. And also to all the audience members for listening, for taking part, and for all the comments. Thank you very much, and enjoy what looks to be a nice sunny day. Make sure you go out for your daily walk, get some exercise, get some fresh air, and maybe we'll do this again sometime. But for now, it's over and out.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.